When pizza delivery driver Noah knocked on the door, he thought he was just dropping off dinner. He had no idea he was about to step into a nightmare, one that would force him to become a hero. The second the door cracked open, something felt off. A woman stood there, but she didn't reach for the pizza. She barely even moved. Her sunken eyes darted behind Noah like she was afraid someone would see her standing there. Her cheek was bruised, her lip cracked. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Before Noah could say a word, a man appeared behind her. Broad shoulders, slicked back hair, a grin way too big to be real. "Hey man, thanks for the pizza," he said, slapping a crisp bill into Noah's hand. But as the man wrapped an arm around her, the woman flinched, and Noah knew this wasn't just dinner. This was a cry for help. If you're enjoying this already, make sure to like and subscribe, because trust me, it's about to get wild. Noah turned to leave, but before he could step off the porch, a voice sharp and panicked sliced through the quiet. "No, please stop." His stomach clenched. That was Emma's voice. Instinct took over. He shifted to the side, peering through the window. His breath caught. Brian had her pinned against the wall, his face twisted in rage. "You embarrassed me in front of a stranger?" he hissed. His hand shot out, striking her across the face. Noah's grip on the pizza bag tightened. His heart pounded. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to walk away. This wasn't his business. This was dangerous. But his feet moved before his brain could stop them. He pounded on the door. "Hey!" His voice was sharp, urgent. "Open up." Silence. Then footsteps. The door yanked open, and before Brian could react, Noah shoved his way inside. "What the hell do you think you're?" Brian started, but Noah wasn't listening. Emma was crumpled on the floor, holding her cheek. Noah dropped to his knees beside her. "Hey, are you okay? We need to get you out of here." His voice was gentle, but his hands were already moving to help her up. That's when something slammed into the back of his head. A sharp, blinding pain exploded through his skull. His vision blurred. His body slumped forward like a puppet with its strings cut. The last thing he saw before everything went black. Brian standing over him, a pair of handcuffs in one hand, and a sick, satisfied grin on his face. Like this video if you're already gripping your seat, and stick around because things are about to get even worse. Noah's head throbbed like a drum in a horror movie. His eyelids felt like they were glued shut, but as he forced them open, reality hit him like a freight train. He was sitting on the floor, his wrists were handcuffed behind his back, and standing in front of him, two uniformed police officers. "What the hell?" Noah groaned, trying to shift, but the metal cuffs bit into his skin. Then he saw Brian, standing tall, arms crossed, smirking like he'd already won. One of the officers turned to him. "Sheriff, what happened here?" Noah's breath hitched. "Sheriff?" Brian let out a theatrical sigh, shaking his head like a disappointed parent. "I don't even know where to start," he said, placing a hand over his heart like he was the victim here. "This man," he jabbed a finger at Noah, "barged into my home, attacked my wife, and tried to rob us." Noah's jaw dropped. "That's a lie." His voice came out hoarse, his head still spinning from the hit. "I saw you hitting Emma. I was trying to help her." Brian scoffed. "See? He's delusional. Probably high. Look at him. Pizza guy, desperate for cash. Thought we were an easy target." One of the officers sighed, rubbing his temple like this was just another annoying paperwork case. "Sir, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, assault, and attempted robbery." Noah's stomach dropped. "Are you kidding me? Look at her." He turned to Emma, silently pleading for her to say something, to tell the truth. But Emma just stood there, eyes glued to the floor, hands trembling. Brian stepped closer to her, just enough for his hand to brush against hers. A silent warning. Emma sucked in a shaky breath. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, He attacked Brian." Noah felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The officers hauled him to his feet. "You're coming with us." Noah was thrown into the back of the squad car. But instead of jail, he was released hours later with a warning, "Stay out of it." But Noah couldn't. He had seen too much. And he wasn't about to let this slide. Hit like if you're rooting for him. And stay tuned because he's about to make a move no one sees coming. Noah couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face. Scared, broken, trapped. He kept replaying the way she had looked at him, silently begging him to help. But in the end, turning her back on him because of Brian's power. He knew he couldn't walk away. No, so he did what anyone with nothing left to lose would do. He made a plan. It was late when Noah parked his beat-up car down the street from Brian's house. The shadows felt thick tonight, but Noah's resolve was thicker. He slipped out, ducking low to avoid any prying eye. With his heart thumping in his chest, he crept up to the back door, which thankfully was left unlocked. Inside, it was eerily quiet. He knew Brian wasn't home. He had to be out on some official sheriff business. Noah's footfalls were soft as he made his way through the house, past the kitchen, and toward the stairs. He didn't know what he was looking for, just something that could bring Brian down. Something that would expose the truth. When he reached the second floor, he froze. Emma's bedroom door was cracked open. He didn't hesitate. He pushed it open, and there she was. Emma was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window like she was already gone. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked up when Noah stepped inside, but the relief in her eyes was quickly replaced by fear. "Noah, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You have to leave, please." "I'm not leaving, Emma." He stepped closer, pulling out his phone. "I'm getting evidence. I'm getting you out of here." Emma shot up from the bed. "No, you don't understand. Brian is too powerful. He's untouchable. You don't know what he can do." Her hands were trembling as she reached for his phone. "Please don't get involved. He'll hurt you. He'll kill me if you do." Noah grabbed her hands, holding them tight. "I can't just pretend I didn't see this. I can't pretend you're not in danger." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm already dead. You don't understand. Brian runs everything, police, politics. He owns this town." Noah's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't have all the answers, but he wasn't about to back down now. "I'll make sure you're heard," Noah said, determined. "I'm going to the FBI." The next morning, he drove to the nearest office. He handed over the recording, shaky and desperate, hoping for something, anything. The agent who listened to it didn't even flinch. After a long pause, he sighed. "This isn't enough. There's not enough evidence here to build a case. And with Brian's position, it's too risky." "What are you talking about?" Noah's voice cracked. "That's him. He's abusing her." The agent put a hand on his shoulder, like he was comforting a lost child. "We can't take down a police officer without solid proof. This is a family matter, kid. Stay out of it." The words hit Noah like a punch to the gut. Stay out of it, but he couldn't. He wouldn't. He walked out of the FBI office, defeated, but not ready to give up. Because if he wasn't the one to do something about it, who would? Alike if you believe in him, and stick around, because the next step is going to be a game changer. A year had passed, and Noah had tried to move on, but he never could. He delivered countless pizzas and cakes to hundreds of houses, but every time, his mind wandered back to Emma. Every time, he wondered if she was still trapped, if Brian was still getting away with it. So when Noah received an order for a cake to be delivered to Emma's house, he couldn't ignore it. He hoped, maybe prayed that she was okay. He figured she might have finally gotten out. When he pulled up to the house, his gut twisted. Everything looked the same, quiet, empty. He rang the doorbell, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. But it wasn't Emma who greeted him, it was her mother. Her eyes were hollow, sunken into her face like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hair, usually neat and done up, was wild, as if she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. She looked at Noah with a mixture of surprise and sadness. "Mrs. Harris?" Noah asked, his voice uncertain. "Is Emma home?" Her face fell. She shook her head slowly. "No, Noah," she whispered, her voice shaking. She's gone." Noah froze. The words hit him like a punch in the chest. "Gone? Gone? What do you mean?" His pulse hammered in his ears. "Emma passed away," her mother said, barely holding it together. "A week ago." No explanation, no warning. Noah's breath caught, his stomach churned. He felt the cold fingers of suspicion crawl up his spine. Brian, he knew it. Brian had done something. Before he could ask another question, the unmistakable sound of a car engine rumbled in the driveway. And there he was, Brian. He stepped out of his car, a smug grin plastered on his face. He didn't even acknowledge Noah. "Everything's taken care of," Brian said to Emma's mother, his tone businesslike, as if he hadn't just driven up in a fancy car to make a scene. Noah's blood boiled. He opened his mouth to speak, But Brian's glare shut him down immediately. "Just go back to your little delivery job, kid," Brian sneered. "This is none of your business." But it was. It always had been. And now Noah was more determined than ever. Emma was gone, but this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. This just got a lot darker, right? Like if you think Noah's ready to take down Brian, and stay tuned for the next twist. This is about to get intense. Noah couldn't shake the image of Emma's lifeless face from his mind. He couldn't let it go, not after everything he'd witnessed. He knew Brian had something to do with it. There was no other explanation. And if the law wouldn't do anything, then he would. So Noah hatched a plan. A crazy one, but it was the only option left. He slipped into his old delivery uniform, the familiar jacket fitting like a second skin. But this time, instead of just delivering pizza, he was delivering something special. A cake laced with sleeping pills. He'd done his research. If everything went as planned, Brian would fall asleep, and Noah would finally get the answers he needed. The plan was simple. Get Brian unconscious, tie him up and make him confess. As he drove to Brian's house, his hands tightened on the wheel. He tried to ignore the adrenaline rushing through his veins, but it was hard. This wasn't just a pizza delivery anymore. This was a mission. When he arrived, everything seemed eerily normal. The house was quiet, the windows dark. Noah took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Brian answered. "Hey man, here's your pizza," Noah said, trying to keep his voice steady. He shoved the cake box into Brian's hands. "Thanks, appreciate it," Brian said, with that same fake wide smile, like he wasn't hiding the fact that he just destroyed a woman's life. Noah nodded, trying to hold back the bile rising in his throat. He kept his face neutral. "No problem. Hope you enjoy," he turned to leave. But as he stepped off the porch, Brian called after him. "Hey, you got a second?" Noah's heart skipped. No. But he couldn't back down now. "Yeah?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Brian stepped back into the doorway. "You want to come inside for a drink? It's a little late to be delivering pizza, don't you think?" No, I've got other deliveries." But as Noah turned to leave, he heard a thud behind him, the unmistakable sound of Brian's body hitting the floor. Noah spun around, heart hammering. Brian was out cold, lying flat on his back. Now was his chance. Noah rushed inside, locking the door behind him. He grabbed a length of rope from his car and quickly tied Brian's hands to a chair. Brian remained unconscious, his breathing steady. Noah's hands were shaking as he stood in front of Brian. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. "Brian?" Noah's voice was low, dangerous. "Where's Emma? What did you do to her?" Brian didn't move, didn't flinch. He just sat there smug, his lips curled into a smirk. "I don't know what you're talking about," Brian muttered, eyes half closed. "You're wasting your time, kid." Noah clenched his fists. "I know you did something. You killed her." And just when Noah thought Brian was going to stay quiet, he heard something from the other room, a faint rustling. It was coming from behind the door at the end of the hall. Noah's blood ran cold. The plot thickens, but what's on the other side of that door? Like this video if you're on the edge of your seat, and stay tuned, because things are about to get even darker. Noah's heart raced as he crept toward the door at the end of the hall. The faint rustling sound was enough to send a chill down his spine. He needed answers, and he had to be sure. He stepped forward, breath shallow. The door was locked, but not for long. Noah grabbed the keys from Brian's unconscious form and jimmied the lock. His hands were shaking, but he didn't care. He shoved the door open, hoping, praying that what he was about to find would finally give him the justice Emma deserved. Inside it was dark. The only light came from a small crack in the window. The air was stale and thick with dust, like the room had been untouched for ages. Noah stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. Then he saw her, Emma. She was lying on a mattress in the corner, her body thin and frail, skin ashen. Her eyes flickered open, and when she saw Noah, a look of shock crossed her face, then relief. She tried to sit up but collapsed back onto the mattress. "Emma," Noah whispered, rushing to her side. "It's okay, I'm here, you're safe now." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't speak. She looked terrified, shaking, trembling as if she had forgotten how to feel safe. Noah pulled out his phone and quickly started recording. He had to get this on tape. He had to have undeniable proof. "Brian's going down for this," he muttered, more to himself than to Emma. "We're going to make sure of it." He called the FBI, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. "This is Noah. I have proof. Brian is holding someone captive. I have the footage, and I need immediate assistance." The operator on the other end barely let him finish before they assured him they'd be there. Noah stayed with Emma, comforting her as best he could, promising her that the nightmare was almost over. Minutes later, the FBI arrived, and Noah led them to the room. They saw the recording. There was no denying it. Brian was arrested that night. Finally, after everything, after all the lies, all the manipulation, Brian was going to pay for what he'd done. And Emma, she was free. This was the moment we were all waiting for, right? Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Emma stood in the sunlight for the first time in what felt like forever, her hands trembling, but her expression one of relief. She breathed in deeply, as if finally exhaling the years of terror she had been forced to carry. Noah stood beside her, watching her take it all in. He didn't know what the future held for her, but right now, he was just grateful that she was free. She turned to him, her voice a mere whisper. "Thank you." Noah didn't have the words. He just nodded. She didn't need more than that. As he walked away, the weight of everything he'd done finally began to settle. He had stepped into something he never expected. And now, with Brian behind bars and Emma free, Noah knew he'd done the right thing. But there was one more thing he needed to do. "If you were hooked on this story," Noah said, as if speaking to the universe, "make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more insane true crime tales." He chuckled to himself as he stepped into his car, knowing that his work wasn't done. There were more stories to uncover, but for now, at least, he could finally breathe. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to hear more wild true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.